So guys, the Canon RP, the specs are officially out. A lot of people aren't happy, but I'm really not surprised one bit at all. The moment word got out that this camera was coming out, people thought the P standing for professional, but it was also known that this would be the cheaper camera. So when the Canon EOS R was released a few months ago at $2,200 approximately, it already had a lot of limiting factors for video users like me. It had a crop at 4K, it had no in-body image stabilization. It just wasn't like the perfect camera that a lot of people would consider Sony cameras to be. So now we have this Canon EOS RP that is cheaper, and people were super hyped for it, but in the back of my mind, I'm like, why are you hyped for a camera that's $1,000 cheaper? You know it's gonna have some crazy, just some crazy specs to it, and by crazy, I literally mean like insane, like mentally disturbed specs. So the things that don't make sense with the EOS RP, and we're just gonna call the EOS RP the really pathetic version, because one, it shoots at 4K, which is great, but 4K is only limited to 24 frames per second. So if you're like me and you like to shoot in 4K at 30 frames per second, you cannot do this on the EOS RP. People will say, well, 24 frames per second is more cinematic. You should shoot at that. That's your opinion, that's great, but with the EOS RP, you can only do 4K 24. Now, this is where it gets really screwy and really weird. I don't know what their thinking is. I'm praying it was an error and they're going to update it later. But, okay, 1080p. You can shoot 1080p at 30 frames per second, but not 24 frames per second. So, if you recall what I just said, 4K at 24, 1080p at 30. So, if you're like me and sometimes you shoot different resolutions and different qualities of footage, you're not going to have a harder time commingling the two files, because I've had issues in the past where you combine 24 frames per second and 30 frames per second, and if you don't adjust the speed, then sometimes they come out jerky. Typically you do want to just mix all frames per second that match, and that's just a little insane that they would do that. I mean, if you're going to do 24 frames per second only on 4K, you better give us an option to do 24 frames per second in 1080p. And to make matters worse, obviously there's going to be a crop. Like, we were expecting there to be a crop on this camera. So the EOS RP has a 1.6 times crop. So not a big deal to some people. You could literally just film farther away from the camera, but you're paying for a full frame camera, but not really getting it. So if you shoot video, say no to full frame at 4K. And just to give you guys an example what this would look like right now I'm shooting at about 50 millimeters. So a 1.6 crop on 50 millimeters would be 80 millimeters. This lens only goes up to 70. So I can just give you an example. So this isn't even 1.6 times zoomed in. So just get that picture in your head, like that 1.6 crop. Let me back up. That 1.6 crop is really limiting if you're a vlogger, if you have a smaller space, if you just want more flexibility with your shooting. Trust me, like when I was getting the EOS R, which also has a crop, I thought, well, it's okay. Like I can move my camera farther away, I can get different lenses. But honestly, it's just something that like you tell yourself to deal with the headache that is Canon for video on the cheaper scale. It's just crazy, because having full frame like on my Sony camera with no crop, I have the ability to go as far back as I want or as close as I want to. And if I want to get even closer, I can use Super 35 mode for, like, I don't know, wildlife photography or anything like that. So that's just another ridiculous feature of this EOS RP. And yes, I'm not done. There's a feature that is even worse than all the previous features I've mentioned. At 4K, there is no dual pixel autofocus. So the reason people get Canon cameras in 2018 and 19 is dual pixel autofocus. Canon cameras have not kept up with Sony, with Panasonic, with Fuji. It's just humorous at this point. So their dual pixel autofocus is really the only saving grace that people have for Canon when it comes to video. And the fact that this EOS RP, if you enable 4K, apparently it does not have the processing power necessary to do dual pixel autofocus at 4K. So basically what you're gonna get is just a lousier version of autofocus. It's not gonna be as good. So just keep that in mind. So this is gonna be very similar to the Canon M50, where people really liked that camera for its 1080p capabilities, but when they used 4K, they were welcomed with no dual pixel autofocus, and they were welcomed with a really big crop, just like the EOS RP. So like, what is the market of this camera? Really, the market of this camera, to me, in my opinion, is people that just do photography. So the price point of this camera is great. It's $12.99 with the body. So that's really cheap for full frame. So if you just want to take pictures, you want that full frame look, you want to equip that with a wide angle lens and do some really good landscape photography, this would be a killer real estate photography camera. But for video, the moment you put it in video mode on 4K, it's just going to crop in really far and just be kind of unacceptable for a full frame camera. If you want to film in 1080p, that is great. So this could make a great 1080p camera, but remember, 1080p doesn't shoot at 24 frames per second. So at that point, you could just go back to like the Canon 80D that shoots 24, 30, 60, all of that. And while we're talking about frames per second, the EOS RP doesn't even shoot 120 at all, like even in 1080p mode. So yeah, hopefully I didn't come across super triggered over this camera, but really Canon, I was holding off with my Canon 80D for the longest time, waiting for that camera that was going to come out and impress me. And that camera was the EOS R, but it really didn't impress me. And now that the EOS RP is out, the fact of the matter, like if you have Canon and you want to be loyal to Canon forever, you're always going to be waiting for that better camera. Like even when their new cameras come out, their specs are going to be limited in comparison to the competition. It's just been kind of known that they don't want to encroach on their cinema lines. So they can sell the Canon C200 for several $1,000s, very close to 5 figures. So if they can sell that, they don't want to have those features comparable to their cheaper consumer cameras. And yes, there is a talk of a like professional Canon EOS R camera coming out, like a higher megapixel count. But to me though, like a higher megapixel count doesn't really mean better for video. So higher megapixels just mean it's better for photography. And typically for video, you want lower megapixels because it allows better low light capabilities. And then of course there's rumors of like a 1DX mirrorless version sometime in the future. People are stating that closer to the like 2020 Olympics, that's when Canon's going to release that. But I mean, that camera could be $5,000 when it comes out. And then to get the really good lenses, they're, you know, $2,000, $3,000 as well. So at that point, you're getting close to that Canon C200 territory. And again, like whenever Canon can get a full frame camera with in-body image stabilization, minimal crop, all the frames per second that you'd want to shoot at, by the time that comes out, the competition will be ahead. So just to quickly mention, like the Sony a7S III has been rumored to come out for a while. And when that comes out, that camera is just gonna, in my opinion, probably shut the market down. They're probably gonna do crazy stuff. They could do like, I don't know, they could have 6K, 8K, they could have 120 frames per second, 4K. you never know. Like, I really think the Sony A7S III is gonna really make everyone shook in the video market when it comes to cameras. But I'm kind of blabbing along now. I'm not really talking about the Canon anymore. So I'm gonna let you guys go. If you made it this far, you are the best person in the world to listen to me ramble on. And if you're here, I'm dying. To resurrect me, please make sure you give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Trying to get to 100,000 subscribers. We're at 84,000 right now. I'm not sure if you can see that back there or not. All right, guys, have a great day. See you later. I will not put a link to the Canon camera in the description below because it's crap. But if you want to buy it, go ahead. It's your money. Bye.